right, my friends, we've come to our last session. As we look forward to a beautiful day with Bitcoin, I want to conclude with a session with a panel that talks about what I began talking about a couple of days ago. It's time for Bitcoin to grow up and for Bcommerce as a system to professionalize. And we have a great panel set to talk to you about their ideas on how all of us can help achieve that. Let's give them a warm round of applause as they come out. Welcome to the stage from the White Company, Edgar Maximillian. From BitStocks, you heard from him earlier, Michael Hudson. From SBI Holdings, Jerry David Chan. And you know him, you love him, you read his tweets, Dr. Craig Wright. All right, gentlemen, here we are, 3 days into CoinGeek Week. We've talked a lot about how it's important for Bitcoin to grow up. What are the things each of you think needs to be done next by both this growing ecosystem and the companies that operate in it to start this process to achieve Bitcoin Satoshi vision? What do you think?
I think there's three main things that need to happen for Bitcoin to really grow up. One is regulatory clarity. The other part is institutional grade products to appeal to the institutions that are looking to invest in Bitcoin. And the third is simple usability for those that are not knowledgeable about cryptocurrency.
Okay. Michael.
I definitely agree with the first point. I think that's something that needs to be clarified. Regulation is a massive, massive concern. From our perspective, we are always going to our law firm meetings with the simple challenge every single time is, we know this is a gray area. This is why we've come here. How do we pull the whites from the blacks and know the rule sets that we need to operate with as a business? We need to know how it's classified. Regulation is really, really important. The other aspect I will say is user interface, create products that are sexy. It should not be nerdy. Get rid of all the crypto hodl like QR codes and all of these crazy long-stringed addresses. Make this useful. Our parents, our grandparents, our children need to be able to use this. Sexy design is incredibly important. Front-end user interface, incredibly important.
Like that.
And the last component is education. Just really do your role in understanding the essence, push away the distortions, and spread the essence as to what this technology is really all about.
All right.
Yeah, I would start with your last point. Education is a very, very big part. I think that's important because we've experienced in the last, say, 5 years, just the continued rhetoric that cryptocurrencies is a way to do semi-shady, illegal things, and so we have to sort of focus more on educating the public that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies shouldn't be used for that. I mean, some obviously will be, and that's their entire reason for existence. But so specifically, Bitcoin isn't going to be one of those projects, and so I think. You could kind of see already in the way blockchain projects sort of exploded after 2013, right? And all the interests through most of the world and enterprise businesses are in blockchains. And without going into any of the funny, analogies and jokes that you can make about the blockchain fad, we really should start appealing to that audience. I mean, because that audience really is interested in blockchains because it's a ledger. Right? So if we start focusing on Bitcoin being a global ledger and less about a speculative asset that you can buy and maybe get rich if it goes to the moon, then you really start appealing to those that clienteling and those enterprises, which I think it's a very easy sell, because if Bitcoin stopped focusing on the token and started focusing on the global ledger, then you can easily go to companies and say, like, look, you have a global ledger which you have to run the servers for, or you and your cartel of chummy companies which are in your group are going to have to run the ledger for. Or you have this global ledger which is global, and you don't have to pay for it. Well, I mean, besides having some sub-cent fees whenever you publish transactions, right? And that's an easy choice. And then the discussion becomes more of, well, do I want to take the small risk that this global ledger, which I don't control, is maybe changed in a way, which I hope things like the Bitcoin SV project solve, because we want to commit into dogma the necessity to never change the base protocol. And if you eliminate that sort of minor risk, then it's a simple choice, right? Do you want to run a multi-party shared database, which has been around since the 80s, or do you want to run a global ledger, which everybody can share? And the more data is put on it, the more valuable the whole ledger becomes. And I think so that I think we should really start taking over the blockchain narrative and space, and try to take their use cases and basically map that into Bitcoin.
Sounds like there almost needs to be two different messages going forward. Obviously, for the consumers, to educate them about Bitcoin, they understand it as a new form of money, a cryptocurrency, right? And they have to be educated about that, but it's sort of the big business users that need to be educated about Bitcoin being the global public blockchain of the future, as I talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Craig, I know you talk about in the office with me a lot about plumbing.
I'm going to take a couple of words from Steve Ballmer. And I'm going to say developers, 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 and keep going. Quite frankly, we don't need protocol developers changing anything. We have everything we need. Right now, everything I talked about with MetaNet is doable today. All the opcodes that we needed are actually re-enabled. We could actually do it. So we are the internet in 1996 or so. We have the ability to manually code HTML web pages. I don't know if anyone here remembers doing that. I remember making some of the ugliest web pages in human history.
You still do.
I was even involved with the Australian Stock Exchange website, so if you go back on the Wayback Machine and you look at how ugly and laugh at it, you'll know that I'm behind part of it. But anyway, so what we need now is people to start building on that. We need also tools. And one of the things that made the internet take off wasn't the internet just being stable. It was also then all the tools that got developed on the protocol. And when people take the data and the research and the IP that we're giving out to do this, and they build that into tools to make it simple, they'll find themselves as businesses. For instance, you have things like Wix and things that people make fun of now that made simple websites easy. Making a simple sort of application or transaction database or something like that based on Bitcoin and making an app so that other developers can develop simply, that's going to be valuable. And as people start doing these things to compile new apps in Bitcoin, then that's a new industry in itself. For instance, if we remember Norton, they didn't start because of all the security tools and everything like that. They had a series of compilers, ugly compilers, but they got them a start in their business, and they're still around, sort of. So,
what are some tools that you think need to be developed most quickly in order to help this ecosystem grow? Anyone have suggestions or things you'd like to see? Jerry?
I got a quick one. I mean, I would obviously say tokenized or something that does token, but since it's already done, I mean, you don't even reiterate that. But one tool which I haven't heard any project or anybody mention, which would be really, really useful, is like a regular fourth generation language to Bitcoin script compiler. Right? But I know it might be complicated.
I'll just jump in there. That is actually something we've been working on. We have been working on a high-level language, and we do want other people to be involved too, because there shouldn't be one language. I mean, if you look at the internet, there's Perl and Python and C, C++, and Go, and so there shouldn't be a language. But we're already doing that. Unfortunately, we got put behind because we had to stop development and develop SV. So if people weren't changing things, it would actually be out now, but that'll happen next year. So
great.
That's underway.
Just to add on that, I think that's a really important point. I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
And this has been, again, the basis of a lot of our conversations that we've at Bitstock's been having with Enchain. It's been geared around providing tools that allow us as businesses to build more sophisticated products. Right. How do we take on challenges like providing a solvency, a custody service that is unhackable? Right. How do we have different ways of providing ultimately site solvency to our client base, our investors?
What I was going to say is, to interrupt you again, one of the things we're actually also wanting to do, now that the protocol is going to be locked down, you don't get rid of protocol developers. What we will start doing is not only scaling, but developing APIs. So we'll have simplified access to the blockchain.
Yeah. Go ahead and finish, Michael.
Basically that.
Yeah, basically.
Right? So it's just the ability to just plug in, and so I can focus what I need to focus on, right? Building great products that allows more density to be built within the network. I'm here to enable people through great design, good product offerings, to enable people to spend and be able to build with Bitcoin a lot easier. That's my job. What I want and what we want at Bitstocks is just the ability to just focus solely on what our objective is, not blockchain development. That's not our interest.
Right. And Michael's mentioned a couple of times today that he has been having conversations with our company and me for the last couple of years. And even though we don't have any business partnership or relationship that's formal, those conversations I have found very helpful because they guide what we do at Enchain. Because obviously we have ideas coming out of Craig and team's head of things that need to be created and done. But it's always helpful for me to have conversations with businesses like his and people in this room to hear what are the things you're trying to do, what are the things you need to do that you can't do now. Because I start hearing recurring themes and they inform the work that we do, that we direct some of our development and research to. And so I encourage you to keep having those conversations with us and others because it really does help us to hear what businesses need as they want to actually create real businesses on Bitcoin.
And to that point, I think Enchain's been very good about listening to the community. We've had discussions early in the year about having tokenized assets on Bitcoin, and then a lot of effort and time and even a prize, was put together to promote that. And that's a really key aspect. I think that's one of the tools, not a developer tool necessarily per se, but a standardized protocol aspect of it that would allow issuers to be able to issue security or asset-backed tokens and really compete with Ethereum, because we've seen so many issues with Ethereum where people mess up the smart contract and then they realize that later there's overflow issues and these tokens disappear. So there is such a huge asset base of things that can be tokenized on a protocol, and if we can really get that onto Bitcoin, that's a multi-trillion-dollar industry.
Can I just add one tiny point?
Sure.
Can we ensure that Ethereum is not the template that we use? It's a horrible user experience.
Well, and I'm glad you bring that out because, I've said it a few times, maybe subtly, and maybe it's time to say so more directly. Sometimes the disagreements we've had with some of the other protocol developer groups have been because of a desire by what we see, people wanting to add things into Bitcoin just because Ethereum can do it. And it's a bit of what I call Ethereum envy. I know that's what Craig calls it too. It's like, just because Ethereum does it this way or they have this, we have to have it in Bitcoin. And we look at that and say, no, you should make decisions about how this all evolves based on what we think is best for Bitcoin, not just because Ethereum can do it.
Oh, Jimmy, can't we have a DAO too?
Yes, Craig, we can have a DAO. No, we don't want a DAO. And no crypto kitties. But by the way, on the subject of tokenized, at Enchain, we intend to continue working with the tokenized team to further develop their solution, which we found, and our team reviewing it found was the most comprehensive by far of the submissions and really understood the blend of technical, business, and legal needs. But we have ideas of our own to continue building even more sophisticated token solutions on top of it. I think it's a great base to start with, but we continue, we'll have plans to develop it even further. Jerry, you want to tell us about some projects or things going on at SBI that you can share with us?
Yeah, sure. So I think I spoke a little bit earlier in the morning about the mining stuff. So I'll talk about the other stuff that's not mining. I think what we're doing right now in the sort of crypto software development department is focus on institutional solutions. So what would you say in the audience you think is the biggest obstacle for institutions or enterprises to do anything in crypto space, in anything in Bitcoin space right now? Right, exactly. Give that man a prize. Cookie.
What did he say?
Custody.
Custody.
Custody. Because when somebody, I think it was Ryan, when he had his presentation, says like, we're not custody. I was going, exactly perfect, because we're going to be custody. Because it's a very different problem. A custody wallet, and for any true, I don't know, some old Bitcoiners who believe that everybody needs to be their own bank. It's a custody wallet. They'll say like, you don't need custody wallet. You should be your own bank. You be your own custody. Well, everybody shouldn't be their own bank. Everybody should have the possibility, or the if you want to be your own bank, you should be able to be your own bank. But you can't basically just say like everybody should do this. It's kind of very socialistic way of thinking things. Like everybody should walk on this side of the road. Everybody should wear red sweaters on Tuesdays. I mean, that's just silly. So
and red socks.
Or, actually, this wasn't planned at all. That's kind of freaky, man. That's just really uncanny. You're never going to get Granny Smith to manage her own money in a mobile wallet. I don't care how. I mean, not to say that maybe there's some radical, awesome UI that's going to be coming out in next couple of years. In which case, I'm more than willing to eat all my words here. But
I agree with the banking model, by the way.
okay. But I don't think everybody's going to even just keep their crypto, but not everybody's going to want to manage their crypto, right? And I think the thing is, people forget that people get to hating banks. Banks originally weren't supposed to be doing all the things that banks do, like inflating money and doing risky stuff, or using their investments in weird ways. Banks fundamentally were supposed to just be a vault, right, for your gold back in 15th century. And once they had everybody's gold, banks also, because all the merchants gave them their gold, they had all these connections with all these merchants, then banks kind of became the middleman to give liquidity to capital. So if you're looking for money, I can find someone who's willing to lend money, I'll do the matchmaking, I'll take a fee. That's the kind of like the basis of banking, right? And I don't think that's ever going to go away, right? Even in the magical world of the future where we have robots, you're still going to have capital that needs people looking for capital and people who want to invest, right? And that matchmaking service is a really important part of banks, and that will always stay. So if we agree, and if we agree to disagree with the rest of the the more revolutionary crypto guys out there, the ecosystem or community, that banks do need to exist and need to have a role, then these banks are going to need to hold crypto, right? And back to what we're working on is like a custody wallet. Simply put, is what if you had $100 million worth of crypto, where do you put it? I mean, everybody here is probably going to, cold wallet, right? Cold wallet, no, maybe not Electron Cash. I mean, $100 million, I don't know. Zappo, maybe you can put it under Zappo. They take your keys, they print it on paper, they cut it in 3 parts, they put it under a Swiss mountain vault with guards and everything. Sure, but you're a person, so you can do that. Because you're just going to throw your crypto in there to save until you're 55 or you want to retire. But if you're a business, obviously you can't do that because you're going to need to use your capital. You're going to need to have access to this money. You're going to need to do settlements on a daily basis. So the only way you can do that is with a hot wallet, right? And we all know how safe those hot wallets are. I mean, I do not have to bring up all the hacks that have happened over the last 5 years. So if you can't hold $100 million in a hot wallet, then how can you operate as an institution, as an enterprise who wants a financial service enterprise who wants to deal with crypto? So we want to solve that solution. So we're building some platforms which will, I mean, it sounds like really selling a buzzword, but it's going to be as safe, or almost as safe as cold wallet, probably even safer, but as usable as a hot wallet. So that's what we're doing.
Great.
Long-winded answer, sorry.
Yeah. Any other exciting developments at your companies you can tell us about?
I can actually want to extend a little bit off what Jerry just said and actually cut into it a little bit. The whole build your bank narrative, I feel, is justified and warranted because as companies, we haven't provided the site that gives people the confidence to not do that. Because at the core, the reason why that narrative was birthed and it created this whole crypto anarchist underpin all banks, all government, everything's bad. It's because This is what we know. So if you have an opportunity where you can have access and sovereignty over your own capital, your own wealth, to then store it yourself and do the digital equivalent of putting it underneath your mattress sounds like a good idea. Because if you give your money to a crypto business or a bank, right now, and this is still a challenge that we at BitStocks are very committed and dedicated to solving, you want to have a good sense of the integrity of that institution that you've just given your money to. You want to know how solvent that company is, and that needs to be live and on the fly. Because if that company has a record of being continuously solvent, and you can see that yourself without outsourcing your vision to an accounting firm or auditing agency, you can see that you will store your money with these banking institutions. You just will. But we haven't built the solutions yet that gives the people the confidence to change that narrative.
Yeah. Any thoughts you want to share on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key parts is building those solutions that are not only safe, but also make it very easy for people to use. I mean, look at PayPal. They do everything that blockchain does, but poorly. It's very centralized, it's very expensive, it's not efficient, and yet they're a multi-billion dollar business. Why? Because it's simple, and people do sacrifice the efficiency and the cost for simplicity. The concept that we have to type in or copy and paste a Bitcoin address or even a QR code in the real world is really quite ludicrous. I mean, people expect to be able to send a payment with nothing more than an email address. That is what we need to achieve, and that's at the White Company. That's one of the focuses. Is creating wallets that allow sending and receiving, requesting funds. That's as simple as putting in an email address in and an invoice number or a memo requesting the reason for the payment. That simplicity, to your point, does sometimes come at a cost of, you're trusting this company or that company, but in the end, you have to trust someone, right? Even if you're just your own bank and you're operating your own node, you still have to trust the power company not to shut down your power or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So there is this thought that on the crypto purist, you need to completely own everything, but being that this is the real world, you will never really own everything that you possibly can. I mean, in the most simple case, even if you generate your own solar power, you still have to be connected to the internet. Right. And then you have to trust the internet company. There's just no way to be completely isolated. And I think that mentality needs to change. And we need to look at companies like what we have here, where they are doing the right thing. They're being very, very transparent. They're following the regulatory compliance that they need to provide simple real-world solutions. And I think that's one of the keys moving forward. And that's one of the focuses that we have at the White Company as well.
So a number of you have mentioned the need for regulatory development, which has been a theme a bit over the last few days. The question I face a lot, especially because I'm the former lawyer, so I'm used to dealing with these kinds of things. I ask, well, who should be, on behalf of Bitcoin, whatever Bitcoin is, talking to regulators, right? Because we're a decentralized community, regulators sometimes want to know who do I talk to? Who are the Bitcoin people, right? Suggestions?
Well, it would be folks like us, because I think once again it should be business driven. Right. So if we have a business use case and it's in regulatory murky waters, then we're the ones incentivized to go to the regulators and say, hey, we want to do this. What do you think? Yeah. So we are definitely talking to regulators. So I guess in that sense, I never really thought of ourselves as being ambassadors of Bitcoin, but we just thought that we're just kind of self-serving and doing our business thing. But yeah, I guess yeah, because.
But I think one of the issues is that all of our discussions with the regulators are very fragmented. Mm-hmm. Right. So we all talk through our attorneys to regulators, but none of us are really on the same page. Coming from the financial world, I'm a big believer in SROs, and it has worked very well. I mean, you have in the U.S. you have FINRA, you have NFA, and their regulatory counterparts, the SEC, CFTC.
SFRO means self-regulatory organization.
For those. And that concept does work. I mean, it basically is an industry group that...
Well, in digital advertising, there are self-regulatory organizations.
Exactly. And so that presents a common ground and a common message to the regulators. And on the other side, it's a self-policing organization where they expect their members to adhere to certain standards, certain rules. And what that does is actually reduces significantly the amount of government interference that goes into some of these financial transactions or types of businesses. You're never going to get away from government regulation. So the two things that you can hope to do is get the regulators on the same page by showing them that you can act responsibly, and number two, present a common voice so that you are driving the regulation in the way that makes sense for you as a business organization and for a group of businesses working towards the same goal.
Yeah, a lot of industries, when they are coming out new, in order to blunt off or try to prevent or limit government agencies from enacting regulation or laws, will form a self-regulatory organization to say, see, look, we can adequately self-police ourselves, and therefore you, government, don't have to pass a law. So, in digital advertising, a good example is IAB, the Interactive Advertising Bureau, and DAA, the Digital Advertising Association, which is trying to self-regulate things like when websites disclose whether they're tracking, and serving you ads based on tracking cookies, right? Or how they deal with collection of information from children under 13. Eventually, governments still pass laws anyways, but that was an early attempt by the digital advertising world to try and blunt off the enactment of regulation. Do you think that would actually, that idea would be accepted by, not I'm talking about the governments, but people who work in Bitcoin? Or do you think that people might view that as, now we're centralizing ourselves into a self-regulatory organization?
I think it will be accepted if the message is delivered accurately, because at the very essence, the very core, the whole process of regulation is to prevent human beings that when they acquire positions of power, to prevent them from abusing that power.
Yes.
That's the essence of regulation. So it actually does come from a good place as long as we collectively can actually see and ascertain that this isn't a regulation that's being put into place for anti-competition mechanisms, because this is also a thing that happens as well. So the broader community should welcome this, because this is going to allow those who are running Bitcoin-based businesses to be accountable, and that's important. Anyone running a Bitcoin business that has custody of anybody's funds should be held accountable for their actions. If they abuse that power, there should be already a well thought out law set that this is what happens. This is a very, very cleansing process for the space, because we've seen what's happened in this cowboy, like Wild Wild West scenario over the last couple of years in cryptocurrencies. This is going to stunt and stifle our growth, and it's going to terrify regulators. The quicker that we all get on the same page, the better.
And to be clear, self-regulatory organizations, and I'm not sitting here necessarily advocating we go create one right now, but it's an interesting topic to consider as the industry matures. They don't have the power to penalize a company, right? It's, self-regulatory organizations are a voluntary inclusion, but what they are designed to do is create pressure on a company.
Peer pressure.
Peer pressure to say, hey, we came up with guidelines, for example, for how you should KYC customers, for example, for, a wallet or exchange, and you didn't follow those guidelines, so now you will be kicked out of our organization, or you can't say you're a member of our organization and follow our policies. They're designed to create, a peer pressure.
A quick note. I mean, we already have one in Japan. So,
you do, right?
Yeah, it's the.
What's the name of it? I know it's got some really cumbersome name, Jerry.
English translation is Japanese blockchain. The JBEVA. No, the JVEBA. Well, anyway, Japanese Virtual Currency Enterprise Association.
Yeah,
it's a mouthful. So all the exchanges are already part of it.
How is that working? Tell us about your experience with that. I'd be curious.
I personally have gone to one of the meetings with them, and basically all it is the exchanges, any sort of blockchain or cryptocurrency sort of organization basically joins, and they basically provide a space. They have some lawyers on retainer. They have some connections with the FSA, which is the equivalent to, I guess, the SEC or FINRA. Maybe no, but FINRA is not really government. It'd be the SEC in Japan, which is the FSA, Financial something Association. It's pretty embarrassing. I can't remember it right now. But yeah, so they have contacts with them, and they basically just set up meetings where we go up and we sort of collectively come up with policies, right? Which are not, like you said, not laws. They're not like enforceable. But if you don't abide by these policies, then you can't say you're part of the SRO. And then basically, as we come up with a set of policies, we then submit these to the FSA and say, like, this is how we think we should be regulated. What do you think? And then generally, you know, they look over it, and if it's not like anything crazy, then they say, yeah, okay, sounds about right, and then they turn it into a law. So
it's a way for
well.
industries to try and create the laws that inevitably will probably come anyways by saying, look, we've been self-regulating ourselves, following these policies for the last 5 years and nothing really bad's happened, or when one company did something bad, here's what happened. And then often, you know, in my experience, it's happened in the digital advertising world, government agencies then go, okay, if we do want to enact a law, we'll just copy what they as a group decided to do. I look at it as a way of trying to control your destiny rather than waiting for a government to tell you what to do or not.
And the other problem is, if you look at most of the ICOs out there, they're classic frauds. You promise one thing, and then you have no intention of delivering. Or you pivot and don't give money back. That's basically fraud. Now, I don't care whether you're saying you're libertarian or anything like that, but the reality is, fraud's illegal. And not because government, but in common law sense, fraud was illegal. And we don't want a society where people run around trying to steal from each other, because that doesn't make society. It just makes a total collapse.
So, Craig, I know internally at nChain, you and I talk a lot about the need for more plumbing, to do the boring work of creating the plumbing, the underlying infrastructure for Bitcoin. Tell us what you mean by plumbing, and what are some of the plumbing elements you think need to still be created?
Okay, so first of all, we need the big pipes. So we need the big sewers, the big water pipes going around the city, and to get that we need bigger blocks. That's number one. Once we have that though, the other part is we need all those little ancillary pipes that get you to and from all the different plumbing connections. So we need all the tools, all the different types of access protocols, we need APIs, and we need all the ways that makes it simple. Just like plumbing, you turn on your water and you expect water to come out, and people get upset when it doesn't. We have a marvelous, amazing invention. I mean, most of human history has not had water running, and a lot of the world still doesn't have water on tap. And we don't, I mean, flush toilets are not even 200 years old. And yet we sit there and take all this for granted. Modern plumbing is amazing, and yet it's boring. And we need all of those connectivity links. The APIs allowing people just to connect to the blockchain and develop and have no idea what the hell they're doing other than it works.
And how do you think we're going to create that? Because that's a lot of work, right? I mean, this is not just something that happens overnight. And one of the things the Bitcoin world has seen has been, you know, volunteer developers dedicating their time to projects and things they want here or there. Some, you know, companies with backing, creating things. But what do you think it's going to take to actually create all this?
That's the whole problem. We don't want a whole lot of volunteers. What we want are people who have great commercial ideas. Because there are literally thousands of things that will make you money right now. If you can create a simplified payment and invoicing system on top of Bitcoin, there are businesses that will buy that. Yeah. If you can create a security access token on Bitcoin, there are businesses that will pay you for that. If you can create a simple purchasing order system on Bitcoin, businesses today will pay you a lot of money for that. Think of the size of Salesforce. Anyone here know how big Salesforce is in the market today? Salesforce.com? Huge. Well over $100 billion.
Right, yeah.
And yet all they're doing is offering a simplified means of sending and receiving invoices and purchase orders. And that's something Bitcoin can do better than any other database when done correctly.
Yeah. But I think it's a good point. It's going to take professionalizing the jobs in this industry, right?
Yes.
So that either people are paid by some company to do this as their job full-time as opposed to
and not just paid by companies. Go out there, have an idea, start your own company and seek investors.
Right.
I mean, this is really what the whole Silicon Valley dream was before it became what it is now, with silly CryptoKitty type app things. Go back to the idea of what Silicon Valley was, building value for people. Build value and get investors to give you something more than, I don't know, firing stupid pigs at birds and whatever.
But what that also takes, as someone who has had a lot of people pitch us projects for potential investment, right? And I sift through a lot of these things. What it takes is converting a mindset to grow up Bitcoin from a hobby project you might make on Bitcoin to something with a business use case, revenue model, and business value to be generated. I find it surprising how many times I actually have to say that to people, because they come up with a great idea to do something cool on Bitcoin, and it looks cool, and then I will ask the question, what's going to be the revenue model on that, or how could some business make money on that? Because that's what will then lead to investment and a commercial approach to the business. And if you can't answer that question, it may be a great project and do something really cool, but it's not going to contribute to this enterprise growth of Bitcoin.
One great thing here is you even have a revenue model in, because we've talked about how you can split transactions. If you actually create a templated system where it allows you to do purchase orders and everything like that, and every transaction out there is able to be split, then you could take a micro payment from each of your customers automatically. So anyone using your version of Salesforce, don't send you a credit card to pay every month. Just every transaction they send pays you, the developer. So a little bit goes into your company wallet. And with those sort of ideas, you actually have a way of going out there and not going, I've got a new open source project and I'm going to make the next wiki thing. I have a new way of making the next billion-dollar company.
I think it all really just boils down to time and economic incentives.
Yes.
You create a product that saves people time, you've got a great product. You create a product that saves people money, you've got a great product. You create a product that makes people money, you've got a great product. It boils down to just harmonics of economic incentives. This will get the right employees at the firm. This will solicit the right investment from the right companies. This is how you build, ultimately, an ecosystem that is going to thrive. It's capitalism.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think we've seen that as well. I mean, if you look at this time last year, it was blockchain of everything. You just came up with some random idea and said it's going to be on the blockchain, and people threw money at you in an ICO. And you know, the one thing good thing that this bear market in crypto has done is it's kind of washed that out and left the space for companies that are building real solutions with real revenue models and that have a path to building that billion-dollar company. So that's been the upside of this market. And what we have seen is that the institutional investors and the VCs are actually now paying more attention than they did before, because last year they were like, well, we don't really know what to do with this because there's just too much things we don't want to touch, and we think that most of them are going to fail, which was exactly correct. And now they're starting to look at those quality projects, which are, you know, not raising an ICO to build something. They're already building something, and they may never do an ICO, but they are using blockchain the way it's supposed to do.
I think what Craig just mentioned made me think of something really interesting. I mean, the fact that you can basically you can split transactional outputs. I guess that's what you're talking about, splitting, right? So basically you can build a system, you can build software, which will create it's embedded in its own way that you use it, the way that you pay to use it. It creates transactions which then divvies out via some sort of, I guess, you know, say this developer, this outsourcing developer spent this much time to develop this product, and this company invested in it. So it would have its own sort of pay schedule, and you can probably even just use like addresses for token owners of you know, companies, and basically as customers pay the software pays everybody who contributed to building it without actually having to go through the intermediary. So that's kind of interesting. But back to my original point, which I think it was what Jimmy, you said, like, what do we need to do next? And I think it made me think of like the biggest thing which is missing right now in the industry, because a lot, like you mentioned, startups are a very, very big, good part, grassroots, organic growth factor. But where are the IBMs in this? Where are the PwCs? Where is KPMG?
They're looking at private blockchains.
Right. So my question, I guess, not really I should be answering questions, but my question to everybody and maybe the rest of the panelists is, are we at the state right now where we can basically say, hey, IBM, you should take a look at this Bitcoin thing again?
We haven't been, because of all of the protocol debates and the scaling limitations at first, and then over the last year, protocol disagreements over what should be a stable protocol.
I thought
we
it
will
would
be
a lot closer now because a lot of the distortions, that's one of the plus sides of the fork. I don't advocate that we should keep on resolving this issue by essentially QE. That's pretty much what is happening. We're splitting off. I don't think that should continue. But I think in this case, it presents a very unique scenario. We've actually removed a lot of the distortions from the core camp, the splitting of the BCH camp. These are splittings of ideologies. We now have I would say, a very pure, aligned ideology as to how we see the world. And it's a very business-driven one. So now it's just a case of, let's see. Yeah. And I think that will attract all the big names now.
Once we establish bigger scaling too, that's going to be critical.
Absolutely.
All right, let's take time for questions, because I know people probably want to talk to these panelists a lot. So I'll stop asking questions, let the audience ask some questions. Yes, question right there.
Hey guys, it's me again, Evan. I think my question is around the topic of SROs, so maybe this is more for Jerry and Edgar. It sounds like a great idea. I think my question is, though, about the benefits of SROs versus the risk of regulatory capture. I used to cover cable companies in the U.S. and a lot of people, other businesses too, have pay a lot of lobbyists a lot of money to ensure basically what ultimately turns out to be anti-competitive practices for people that are at that time incumbents. So how do you think about that risk versus obviously the need to facilitate better conversations with regulators through something like SROs? Thanks.
Well, what we say is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I think that's very true. Yes, there are risks, for sure. The anti-competitive practices, I think, most trade organizations, they can evolve in that direction, but generally the burdens of participating in that SRO aren't that high. Like, yes, maybe it's anti-competitive to the people that are not in the SRO, but you really should be in the SRO. There's not really an excuse to not be. And again, it just goes back to, you will be regulated. I mean, we've seen that. Look, we've tried having completely unregulated Bitcoin environment, and then we realized that it just connects to the real world at some point. There's no escaping that. So I think the way that those risks are managed is that you create an SRO that has a good governance structure. It can't be governed by who has the most hash power. Like, that's not going to be a determinant of voting power in that SRO. You take leaders from different camps, but that do share the common vision, and you build consensus. And I was involved in several SROs and different types of things, and there's things called parliamentary procedure. And I know that sounds silly, sitting around here, but those things exist for a reason, and it's to build SROs that do create a framework that all the voices of its members are heard, that no member gets overbearing power within that SRO, and that the SRO really can function as a unified voice. So I think the risks can be significantly mitigated, and the advantages far outweigh them.
I'll say that I don't think the Bitcoin world is ready for an SRO.
I would agree with that.
Not ready. The other thing to think about,
but I think it's something to think about longer term.
On a country basis.
The other thing to think about, we're global.
Yeah.
So if we have a SRO that is too restrictive in any country, all they're going to do is limit their own business.
Right. And I don't think SRO, well, maybe that's what you meant, but when you said Bitcoin community is not ready for an SRO, you meant a global one.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, yeah, for sure, then I agree with you.
Yeah.
But I mean, SROs are really an interface to your local jurisdiction. So I mean, of course, you're going to have local ones. I mean, there'll be a Japanese SRO, there'll be an American one, there'll be maybe a UK one. And that makes total sense because, as much as I always argue against meat space consensus, which is effectively what an SRO is, right? It's just a bunch of meat space people meeting and then agreeing to do something this way, and it should be hash power instead. In this case, we do need meat space consensus because an SRO is literally the interface to the meat space regulators. So, we can't ask, as said over there, you can't ask the regulators to just do whatever the majority hash says, right? I mean, that's not how regulation is written because regulation is not Bitcoin. Regulation is not the blockchain. Regulation, lives in a world of laws, and those laws need to be managed by organizations who are under or a party to those laws. So I think the trade-off is worth it, even though the SRO in the worst case scenario will end up like the Bitcoin Foundation, right? Because it was attempting to be a global one, which makes no sense whatsoever.
But the funny thing here is everyone seems to think that Bitcoin is new, so therefore no law applies. That's wrong. There has been no time in Bitcoin's history where it was not covered by law in every jurisdiction on earth except maybe the Belgian Congo. And that's because I don't think they actually have any law right at the moment. So if you want to be anarchist, there you go. But the reality is, it's money. And people go, oh, but it can't be money because it's a commodity. Money was a commodity. Gold-backed money was commodity money. So this is not new. There is nothing in Bitcoin that is new. I keep pointing out that if you're old enough to remember the 90s, you probably remember dial-up software programs that were advertised to buy pink sheet stocks. There was a company, Free IPO, and another one, Web IPO. Hundreds of these popped up in the 90s, exactly the same as the IPO stuff, and they sold pink sheets.
I see.
And they tokenized, using bulletin boards, pink sheet, penny stocks. And all this got taken down by the SEC. And now the argument is, we're nothing like that because it's a blockchain.
Right.
And the SEC goes, but why is a blockchain different? And they're slowly figuring out that it's not. It's a peer-to-peer exchange. That's it.
I want to add on that as well. In fact, I think that's a very, very profound question. Your name, sir? Evan. The question that you raise is a very real scenario in the world. There is corporate lobbying. There is anti-competition mechanisms facilitated through cozy relationships between large corporations and the regulators. This is a fact.
Yeah, it's happening today in Bitcoin already. Yeah.
So, and the point that Craig made, I think, really is the solution. Bitcoin is global. So if you apply capitalism to a global distributed monetary system, then these pockets of lobbying that are happening around the world, that's a short-term gain. You have to now think globally. I think Japan's led the way. Right? And we've seen how other jurisdictions now have kind of woken up because Japan took a stance. That's competition. That's capitalism. You want your jurisdiction to compete with whichever jurisdiction may try and do this next. So it is kind of a chicken and egg scenario, but we are progressively moving forward. And I think this is actually one of the brilliant ways, because Bitcoin is trying to speak one measurement of value around the world, this is actually going to create the kind of environment that we want to see as a collective.
Yeah, it's a complicated question because of Bitcoin's decentralized nature, its history being born, and developed by people who were resistant to government and the establishment. But, I'm not sitting here encouraging or wanting a ton of regulation and laws to come govern Bitcoin. But Craig is right. What happens in law is not that governments pass new laws necessarily to govern a new technology. They just extend and interpret existing laws and regulations in new ways to cover the development of technology. But it's an important issue to consider as Bitcoin grows up, right? Especially as bigger businesses. If we want bigger businesses to come use Bitcoin, and the banks, and the big retailers, this gives them comfort. We can deny it, but it's true, right? It gives them comfort. Other questions? Over here, from the lady over here at the end. I'm going to stand up. If you stand up and yell your question, I'll repeat it for you. Yeah.
So my question is about lending. An unfortunate reality is that a huge number of people, especially in the westernized world, they live inside credit and they need their Visas and their MasterCards to afford things even like groceries. And so basically, is there going to be a plan in place? Like if we want Bitcoin to be a globalized payment method, then is there a plan for a revolving credit lending system similar to that of credit cards?
You can basically run a credit card system and whatever else against Bitcoin right now. The problem has been this idea, let's all be our own bank, which no one is their own bank. By definition, banks have long and short time provisions that they match. So they take people with short time provisions and match them with long time provisions. For instance, they take savers who might want to take their money out next week, and they match them with people who want to have a 40-year home loan. That's what a bank does. Now, the reality is that will evolve over time, but we have to have general use of Bitcoin. The same way we have credit cards and debit cards coexisting right now, we'll have all this stuff coexisting for quite some time. So we've got a number of solutions that we're going to start plugging to actually the credit card companies, ways that make credit cards safer and more secure and faster. And hopefully that'll convince them that Bitcoin's a good thing and get credit card companies using Bitcoin.
I want to maybe clarify or maybe correct what you just said. I think because what you said as banks doing, matching these long-term obligations versus or short-term ones to long-term ones, that's what a bank should be doing. But unfortunately, banks do more than that, because when they issue mortgages, they're actually creating money. So if you just actually took the people who deposited money with you and you redistributed to people who want to borrow money and you did a one-to-one match, that would work. That would work in Bitcoin. But in a world where you need to basically create money by getting a loan from the bank, not from bank's money, who the bank's custody of somebody else's money, but from literally the bank, and they just increase their balance and then magically money is created. I think maybe, I don't know if that was the question, but if that was the question, how can that happen in Bitcoin? Because you just
the same way it used to happen. People don't realize, but before the gold exchange standard, so back from the 1830s in England here, right up until about 1888 when things started changing, the gold standard was effectively a solid peg. This is before the silver bimetallism problems and everything like this. So the amount of gold was actually backed to the actual pound note, and yet you still had mortgages. So the government was able to have at the stage it was about 30% capital holding. So you could keep 30% of the money in gold and expand still using notes, balancing the amount there, and when things happened the government would have to buy back money, etc. And at 30% it actually still worked quite well. When the wars and everything came in 1914, the government issued so many bonds that the amount of actual money that they had to repay the 30% gold went down to something like 2.7% of the holdings, which sort of devalued the pound significantly.
All right. In our final time, I'm going to actually ask the final question to our panelists here. So, 10-year anniversary of Bitcoin's emergence through the white paper this year, and now we're also looking to the future. If you could change one thing that's happened in the history of Bitcoin, what would it be? And what do you want next for Bitcoin with its new future?
If I could change one thing, I think if we had a consensus from the very beginning and kind of went the route of SV without all these sort of hiccups, that would have probably created a lot of confidence in Bitcoin, and we probably would have been a lot further along in terms of institutional level of attention and investment. But it is what it is. Sometimes you have to hit some speed bumps to get to where you need to be going. And I think we've learned some lessons from that, and the future does look bright because things are a little bit more aligned now, and we have a very good protocol that has all the opportunities that we were hoping that it would. In terms of the future, I think the next thing, we talked about it before, clear and reasonable and fair regulation so that we can have all the advantages of Bitcoin and not have the SEC go in and charge people that are doing projects like EtherDelta, so that everybody knows what they do and what they can't do, and that those laws are beneficial to innovation. I think that's number one. Number two is greater usability. We want our projects and our products to be able to be used by our grandmother or our grandfather, and we can't make it complicated for them. I definitely believe that in the next 5 years we'll see things that are even easier to use than anything out there in terms of payments, to the point that your grandmother that has a smartphone, because they all have now, can do everything from there and buy Bitcoin, use it, manage their identity across different platforms, and truly create that system that empowers financial transactions and payments without overcomplicating it with the technology that's necessary, but really doesn't need to be visible to the end user.
Michael.
I wouldn't like to change anything. And the reason why I wouldn't like to change anything...
Nothing? You wouldn't change anything in the past 10 years?
I think this is a process that we had to go through. Am I frustrated at the fact that it took 10 years? Yes. I think we should be a lot further ahead in 10 years than we are now. If I really want to say I would like to have changed something, the concept of proof of social media. I think people believe that because someone has an incredible amount of Twitter followers, that that person must match that in terms of intellect. It's not the case. So that is definitely something I like to see cleansed and changed. I want people to consult and solicit their own discernment, do their own DD. I don't even take what I'm saying as gospel, scrutinize what it is that I'm saying, see if it actually checks out. Where I see things going is the continuation of where we are right now. The corporate movement, the agenda behind those around the SV camp, we just need to keep on plowing forward in the direction that we are. And I'm very, very confident that we're all going to hit our collective objectives because of that.
Jerry.
Okay, I'm going to change it up a bit and give like geeky answers. The people who probably only, if you've been in Bitcoin since like the beginning will understand. I thought of one thing which would be interesting if it was different. I really wish Satoshi didn't give his keys to Gavin and gave it to Linus Torvalds instead.
Oh, God.
I don't know.
Have you seen the crappy sisters being saying?
I know. It's kind of a half
Craig,
joke.
no comment.
Because Gavin was, a very nice guy, and because he was a little bit too nice, he let, other people get in and become influential, and those people were the ones who would eventually basically say, no, Vitalik, we're not going to allow you to put op return stuff, and you should just go make your own blockchain, and Vitalik did. And then if that wasn't the case, maybe... things would be very different if Vitalik was building everything on Bitcoin since 2013.
Probably would have all these ICOs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so if it was Linus, he would be like, no, hello, no, you guys, you're not allowed to write to code. Sorry, only I write to code. So I don't know, kind of a facetious answer. The other one is I wish I would have learned about Bitcoin like in 2010 instead of in 2012. So there was a big difference in price. Right. Although price doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I know. Price doesn't really matter.
Price doesn't matter at all. It's
not what your wife says. What do you want next for Bitcoin's rebirth?
Oh, what do I want next? I just for us to just keep this sort of mentality, this sort of Bitcoin for business mentality. Mm-hmm. I want it to be very much keep the people who potentially could be bad actors or to use this tool that was created for things which are not legal in your jurisdiction, because I guess there's many jurisdictions, and I guess you could do anything in Belgian Congo, so I suppose Bitcoin ABC will have a great time there.
Yeah.
But I want us to basically keep,
And satellites work there too.
So I want to keep the whole this mentality that we need to build Bitcoin for businesses, and we need to bring Bitcoin to businesses. We need to get IBM on board. We need to get PwC, KPMG, because these guys do a really great job at integrating and doing all the stuff they do with every other technology out there. Why have they been avoiding Bitcoin? And maybe that's a question that none of us can answer exactly, and everybody can, you may have your own answer, but, figure it out, and let's get these guys on board so that we can start integrating Bitcoin now. Let's just get rid of this image, this negative image that's Bitcoin's carried around since 2013, right? Since it all went bad back then.
Right. All right, Craig, what would you change over the last 10 years of Bitcoin's history?
Two things, and they're both really involving me.
No.
One, I would have learnt to harden up a lot earlier, and I would have spoken up a lot earlier about things I believed in.
Mm-hmm.
I would have.
How soon earlier would you have wanted to speak up?
2011. Mm-hmm. And two, I would have learnt to trust people a lot earlier, because it's been critical in where we are now to have people like Jimmy and to be able to trust him with running everything that I can't do, and there are many things I can't do. To trust people like Shadows and Daniel over there, silly Austrian guy, who give me shit about my code all the time. And that's because these guys code way better than I ever hoped to. And they're good at it. And guys like Owen and the research team who take all my shit and put up with my shit, everything I tell them, and give stupid deadlines and say we need it all written up, say 2 weeks ago. And they manage to work their butts off and do it. And to say thank you to everyone much earlier. And to thank everyone who actually builds on Bitcoin. And uses
all of you out there, too. Thank you. All right, and what do you hope for this future of Bitcoin now?
I hope people will actually start seeing and understanding just how much they can do and actually build on Bitcoin. Not that they're going to get rich by some miserly thing of, like a Scrooge-like thing of getting a pile of paper wallets and putting them in a room and throwing them over themselves, going, one day my hoodle's going to make me rich. But rather, actually building and creating something that will become an industry, will become a corporation, will become a business that maybe you can hand down to your kids and have them run, and become so big and generational that people will go, bloody whatever Bitcoin company out there that you just created, it's like Google and they own everything and it's terrible. I hope you do that.
Well, to summarize our week and to thank all of our panelists, I think the lessons we've learned over the last few days are for Bitcoin to grow up and professionalize and achieve its true vision, what we believe is the Satoshi vision. It needs some education, needs a bit of responsible regulation, needs some building of things like plumbing and applications, needs big business to feel safe and consumers to feel safe and comfortable using Bitcoin, and needs some inspiration as well from all of us in this room and anyone else out there in the world as well, and needs a bit of inspiration that I think all of you help provide to every one of us as well. And so I'm going to excuse the panelists to the front row for a second while I wrap up. One final thing here.
Before we run off too, I'm just going to say one other thank you that I haven't said yet. Also thank my wife and my family.
Yeah.
Because as Jimmy said, yes, like I was floating around Greece and Jimmy and Neil were there with me, and my wife and family were there, and yes, I was on a yacht and all the rest. And while they were enjoying themselves, I actually sat on the top and wrote papers.
You made a metanet.
Yes,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I thank them for just putting up with that shit. And thank my wife for actually letting me get up early in the morning and work late at night. And I thank her for letting me come out and travel and going out and spending time with all you guys rather than her, because I do love spending time with her. So thank you to you and thank you to her.
Craig's wife is going to go down in history as the unsung hero of Bitcoin. I'm confident of that. So we did talk so much this week about growing up, and I have really loved seeing all of you here to form a new emerging and vibrant community for Bitcoin SV. And no matter what we call it, it's really the ultimate thing we have been fighting for so long, this core design, this core Satoshi vision for Bitcoin. This video we saw at the beginning of the week, I'm playing again because it reminds me of the different faces that we are all seeing around the world. They are coming together. They've come together here at this conference, and they really are reflective of, I think, a family that's being built. We often talk at nChain about the nChain family, but I think now it's really a Bitcoin family that has to emerge. The people who have come here to start a new dream, which is just really the continuation of a dream started 10 years ago. It's an important thing to remember. The core design, the core vision, great faces and people who've all wanted just something so simple. A stable, scalable, secure protocol on which to build a dream of a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. One that will provide economic freedom to the world, some bit stocks along the way, a creative design marketplace for artists of the world, global domination starting out of Asia, and I'll thank the defenders of Bitcoin. But I want you to be all defenders and preservers of Bitcoin. To join this man and all of us here in this room on the journey to fulfill the Satoshi vision. That's a wrap. For those of you who come to the party, I'll see you at Le Cirque at 9 p.m. Wear a great costume. Thank you all.
Visa.